workshop. This workshop will consist of a 40-minute presentation on building credit by Eileen Loustau with a short Q&A session towards the end. If you have any questions, make sure to PM me or type it into the chat, where we'll answer it during our Q&A session at the end. Eileen has spent her career in financial services marketing, holding senior leadership positions at Wells Fargo, Charles Schwab, BlackRock, Pensco Trust, Bank of the West, and Lending Club. She is currently SVP, Head of Marketing at Chevron Federal Credit Union and Spectrum Credit Union. In all of her roles, she is focused on creating innovative and easy to understand financial education content to help both individuals and financial advisors optimize their financial health. Eileen holds a BA from UC Berkeley and an MBA from Georgetown University. In November 2020, she received the certificate in personal financial planning from UC Berkeley Extension. She lives in North Berkeley with her husband and 2 sons. And with that being said, take it away, Eileen.
Hey, thank you, Deepta. That was a very nice introduction. And I just want to express my extreme gratitude for being invited to present Good to Great, Establishing and Improving Your Credit Score. I'm very excited to be here. You know, I often sort of think about my roots at Berkeley and the fact that I was an English major, and here I am all these years later, sort of having really spent my whole career helping people understand personal finance. And I think maybe part of that was being an English major and trying to connect with your audience and thinking about things. So anyway, I really appreciate being invited. And really, I do encourage questions. The presentation will probably take about 30 minutes, and so I'm really happy to answer anything as it comes up, as Deepta mentioned. So please. But what we're really going to do is we're going to break up this workshop into 3 parts. Part 1 is really about establishing credit. How do you get off on the right foot and set yourself up for success when going out and getting credit? Then part 2, we're going to really talk about how do you take your credit and go from good to great, and what are all the little, I'm going to call them little strategies that you can do to actually improve your credit score. And then part 3, if you have been using credit now and in student loans, etc., you might want to, we'll talk a little bit about debt consolidation strategies and other ways to actually optimize your debt position. So that's going to be the 3 parts. I do, though, want to say that I think sometimes people think debt is a bad thing, when in actuality, debt managed well is actually a really good thing. I've actually heard people often say, oh, I'm never going to get a credit card. I don't ever want to have debt. And there's part of me that says, oh, gosh, you know, if it ever comes time that you need to borrow money to buy a house, or you want to buy a car or something at some point in your life, having established credit is really going to help you. So some debt actually is good debt. And then the other thing, just with my personal financial planner hat on, is it is always good, even if you are in debt, to think about having that emergency savings and to try to have anywhere from, you know, ideally 3 months, maybe even for some people 6 months of income expenses sort of saved, and being able to actually have your emergency savings and manage your debt at the same time can mutually coexist. And again, we'll sort of talk about that. But part 1, establishing credit. I wonder if just by maybe a show of hands, like, do people have credit cards? Do you have credit cards? Did you sign for your student loan debt? Like, you know, are you sort of already there in terms of having some credit? Okay, cool. Usually for most people, getting a credit card, or you may hear this term at some point, which is called an unsecured loan. These can be personal loans, credit cards, etc. But The reason why they're called unsecured is because a lender is actually giving you this line of credit and there's no collateral against it. There's nothing they can take away from you if you happen to not pay your credit card bill, right? As opposed to if you go and you get a home loan, if you don't pay your mortgage, they can come and repossess your house. And the same thing with an auto loan. Most of those are what are called secured loans because they're secured by the thing that you're actually buying. Whereas the unsecured credit card debt is really, what do I want to say? This is essentially why, if you've ever wondered, that why these interest rates on these different types of loans, actually credit cards have much higher interest rates than say a mortgage. And it's essentially because the lender is taking the risk on you to lend you this money, and then they have no recourse if you don't pay them, which is why the interest is often higher. So just in case you don't know this, when you are out establishing credit, you need to be using your social security number as the primary number or as a co-signer on that credit card. So if by chance your family or a friend or I know it's funny, even my husband, I have an American Express card and I got an extra card for him. All of that is actually under my social security number. And so all of that credit history only goes to me as the primary. If someone adds you as an account holder and just gives you the card like your parents, it's still your parents' responsibility and it's their credit. So you're not building credit if someone just adds you as a card holder. You need to be the primary or the co-signer. Some people are often confused about that. So it's good at a certain point to try to get a credit card where you are the primary or the co-signer. Some people actually also approach this a little bit differently and might get a credit card that's called a secured credit card. And this almost seems a little counterintuitive. You're like, okay, I'm going to go give a bank or a credit union or a lender $300 or $500. They're going to keep that money, and then they're going to give you a credit card with a $300 or a $500 line. And what they really want you to do is actually use your credit card and then pay it back and show that you're a responsible borrower. And usually after 6 months, sometimes a year, they'll say, oh, wow, you responsibly use the credit card, and then they'll move you from a secured credit card to an unsecured card with a bigger line. So that's another way if you're having a hard time actually establishing credit, where you can go and request a secured credit card. And then we also say that oftentimes retail store cards, you're at Marshalls or TJ Maxx or wherever you might be, and they might say, hey, would you like to try a credit card? These have low limits and often have an easier way to actually get a credit card in your name. And then you can pay that off, and then they see that you're doing well. Credit unions, I currently work for a credit union, are often more open to giving members credit because that's what they sort of stand for. The mission is all about helping people establish credit. But I did want to just mention that when you're establishing credit, what doesn't count, and again, sometimes people are just confused about this, is if you're financing a phone or a computer or even a mattress, they'll say, come in and get a mattress, and then over 36 months, you can pay it off. Those are actually just payment plans. You're not actually establishing credit. Or if you're buying your phone through your phone provider, in a certain amount, that actually isn't counting. It's neither harming nor helping your credit score because it's actually just a payment plan. So those are some good things about establishing credit. The other thing that you want to really sort of do when you start out is there's these two formulas that are sort of the most involved in figuring out where you stand in your credit. and how you're approaching that. And the first piece of math, and I've already heard that a lot of you are math majors or computer science majors, so this is going to come super easy to you. But you want to figure out what your debt to income ratio is. So I'm going to, at the end of this, talk about a lot of the inventory that you can do to sort of set yourself up for success, understanding all of the different aspects of credit. So the first thing you want to do is you want to say, okay, I got a student loan. How much do I have in my student loans? And then maybe I have a credit card. And so with, $3,000 on it, and these examples are just all for illustrative purposes. So say you have $18,000 in debt right now, but the job that you're going to take is going to pay you $54,000 or whatever, and you just do the math. So 18,000 divided by 54 is 33%. And so this particular example, this person's debt to income ratio is 33%. And so usually what a bank or a lender is looking at is that they feel comfortable when it comes to, especially to unsecured credit, of giving people credit if you have 35% or less. Your debt to income ratio is 35% or less. So it's just a good number to know and to sort of keep in the back of your head. And then the next number, the next math that you sort of need to do here is what's called your credit utilization ratio. And this math is one of those little sneaky things I'm going to tell you about at the end. But so let's say you have a credit card and that one credit card limit is $5,000 and you have a balance on that of $1,000. And then credit card 2, that one has a limit of 5,000, but you've maxed that one out. Your balance is also 5,000. So here your credit utilization ratio, basically how much can you access versus how much you have accessed. 6,000 divided by 10, 60%. So in this case, a lender might look and say, ooh, this person's credit utilization ratio is too high. Ideally, in order to improve your score, they want to see your credit utilization ratio usually around 30% or less. And so that's why, over time, there are some strategies on what you can do to actually sort of change the math here. So 2 formulas, and this is sort of part of the workshop. At the end, I'm going to encourage you to go do some inventory and then go do this math so that you, with confidence, know where you stand on your debt to income ratio and your credit utilization ratio. Those are the 2 numbers. And so some good best practices that are really going to help improve your credit score over time is paying your bills on time, every time. I highly encourage using alerts and auto payments. I know that's how I actually pay my credit cards so that I never forget. I go into the portal or the app and actually make sure that, I can either pay off my balance in full. You can decide how much you want to pay. So really encourage using auto pay. The other thing that I want to mention is aligning your payment dates to your cash flow. So it's very interesting. At when I worked at Bank of the West, we got paid on the 15th and then the last day of the month. Interesting. And then now working at Chevron Federal Credit Union, very odd. We actually get paid on the 7th and the 22nd. Okay. Very, so one of the things that you can do, and I just want you to know this, is that depending on when you get paid, or you can actually call your lender and you can say, hey, my credit card is actually due on the 17th, but I'd really rather it be due on the 5th, or whatever date you want. And in almost all instances, your credit card or lender will actually change the date to actually address your cash flow. So this is another one of those things where you just advocate for yourself and call and say, hey, I'd like to change the date, and they'll change the date for you so that you can align your payment to your cash flow. Another ideal is to try to pay off your credit card in full each month, or at least pay more than the minimum. There's a lot of studies out there, you probably are aware of these, that, unfortunately, if you just pay the minimum required, it can often, that's sort of the hole that you fall in and really get behind in credit. And so one of the things that we also encourage, another sneaky trick that I'm going to mention to you, is maybe even paying the minimum twice a month. Just showing the lender that you're really trying to get your debt down. And then the other thing that really hits people sideways is if by chance you're disputing a bill, it is always best to actually pay the bill before it goes to collections. So, sort of funny story. Actually, one of the most senior people who I worked for at Bank of the West actually couldn't get credit. And he told this story all the time. And the reason why he couldn't get credit was he once had a hospital bill that he had already paid, but then they thought that he didn't pay it. So he didn't pay this other hospital bill. And it was, it's not funny, but I'm just telling you the story. And so we were actually coming out with a new credit card, and he couldn't get the credit card because they actually wouldn't, because one of his bills had gone to collections. And again, this is a person who definitely qualified for a credit card, but many lenders, if you've ever been sent to collections, will just never lend to you. So it's better almost to figure out if you have a friend or a parent or anybody who can help you pay that bill before it goes to collections, and then dispute it and get a refund. That's a big thing. And then of course, checking your credit score. So your credit score, if you have a banking app now, you probably see that you get an alert, you get a little notice. Your credit score is only updated monthly. Okay, so just monthly. So there's no need to look at it more than that. However, one of the things that's happened through the Secure Act and through COVID is you used to only be able to get a free credit report annually, but now you can actually get as many free credit reports as you wish. And so one of the things that we're sort of saying, recommending to people, is you might want to go and get your credit report maybe twice a year, just to sort of see if anything's changed. And that shows you all of the credit cards, all of the loans, everything that you actually have outstanding. And you can get that from annualcreditreport.com. So that's all the sort of the, if you want to call it, the basics of understanding credit and establishing. And so now what can you do to improve your score? But first, what is a credit score? Just in case. So there's 3 agencies out there that make up scores. There's Experian, and Experian actually came up with the name FICO, if you've heard your FICO score. So they own the trademark for the word FICO, that's Experian. And then TransUnion actually is another credit reporter, and then Equifax. And then you've probably all heard about Equifax. That was unfortunately, the credit provider that had the data breach. And they each have slightly different scales, okay? So for Experian, excellent is 750 to 850. And you can sort of see that fair is 699 to 650. Whereas TransUnion has this thing called average, which is 700 to 621. And then you can see that Equifax's fair is actually 690 to 580. So they all sort of slightly different in the, I'm going to call it in the middle. However, pretty much at the top, excellent credit scores are usually 750 or above. So it's a good thing to know your credit score. And the average American credit score, and this number is post-pandemic, so I went and I looked it up again. It is about 700. Is what the average American has. And here's the reason why it matters. Or actually, let's do how you get, what are the components that actually add up to the credit score. Okay, so your payment history, this is why I mentioned paying your bills on time. So your payment history is 35% of your credit score. And then 30% of it is your current loan to credit card debt, right? So that's your credit utilization ratio, essentially. That's 30% of it. The length of your credit history is 15%. So this is one of those unfortunate things we jokingly say, wine improves with age, and so does your credit score. Sort of the longer you've had it, the more points you get. And so it's a little bit of a disadvantage to people who are younger in their credit careers. Having different types of credit actually also adds bonus points. So if you have had an auto loan and a home mortgage and a credit card, you actually get extra points for showing that you've been able to actually pay off different kinds of credit. So that's 10%. And then this is just jargon. You may have heard this term. It's called PINGs, new credit PINGs, meaning either you're out looking for credit and so you're applying for loans. Those can count against you, or this is where lenders are actually saying, hey, I want to go give you a pre-approved offer of credit. And that's something that you're not even doing, but that can actually count against you if you have too many pings, which is why a lot of, there's a lot of, I want to say sort of feeling out there where you can go to TransUnion, Equifax, and Experian, and you can actually freeze your credit and say, I don't want anybody actually offering me credit. I want to be the person who applies for credit. So that is a complete option where you can actually go to the credit bureaus and you can actually opt out of credit pings. Okay, and so essentially, the title of the presentation, Good to Great, what takes you from good to great is when you're good, you're sort of younger in your credit history. So the credit bureaus think and the lenders think, that most likely you're financially responsible. Hopefully you're making your payments on time. You don't carry a high debt to credit ratio. And this whole idea of like, it seems like you're likely to pay it off, as opposed to having a great credit score where you have this long, consistent history. You either have low or no debt. You've paid off different kinds of debt. And so you've been proven reliable. Okay. And so now, so here's the why, the sort of why it matters. And it's probably something more in something like the auto loan. So let's say you wanted to go get, you wanted to go buy a car, and the car costs $25,000. You're going to put $5,000 down, and so you're going to finance $20,000. They're going to run your credit score. They're going to see what your credit score is. And you can do, and I just wanted to make sure people, again, know this, like, you don't have to finance that car with the dealer, right? You can go to a credit union, you can go to your bank, you can go other places, and you can actually get the loan. And then you can go to the dealer and then you can say, no, I already have a loan. For some reason, I've had questions before in the past that people thought they had to finance it through the dealer, but you don't have to. But there is a big difference if you can look at this slide, where if you have a good credit score, the interest rate they might charge you on a car is maybe, and these are sort of ballpark numbers, they might charge you 5.5%. But if you had a great credit score, they might charge you 3, sometimes less, 2. You never know what promotions they have. But the challenge is if you have a fair or a poor score, which we were showing you before, they might charge you anywhere from 11%, 19%. I've seen car loans actually in the 20s, in the 20%, because you don't, and that's when it actually makes a difference. So you have, just using the great from good to great, while it looks like it's only $21 a month, you're like, okay. But over 60 months, which is the normal car loan is 5 years, 60 months, that's $1,260. So it does make a difference over time. The other thing that I just want to just tell a quick little side story about buying cars is if you're new in your credit career, let's say you went and you bought a car and you haven't had your credit history established yet, and they charge you something like 11% or one of these higher interest rates. If you show that you are a good borrower and you're paying your auto payment every month for 12 months, this is just another little hint. On the 13th month, you could go to a bank or a credit union or somebody else, and you could actually refinance your car loan because you've proven that over that first year you did a good job paying it off, and you can refinance after 13 months, ideally to a lower interest rate. So if you ever get stuck in a situation where again, as you're establishing your credit, that you didn't get the best rate you possibly could, I hate to say, but stick it out for a year. It is possible to refinance your car loan. On the mortgage side, it's a little bit even dicier because, of course, mortgages are paid. The most common mortgage in the United States is a 30-year fixed. So you're going to pay your mortgage over 30 years. Here, a good credit score, you might, have a rate of maybe 4%, but a great credit score, it might be, 3.87, whatever. There might be 25, 30 basis points difference. And again, it doesn't seem like $35 difference is that big a deal. However, over 360 months, you got to remember, that's $12,000 over 30 years. So it's always sort of worth that. And I will be honest with you that if you have a poor or a fair credit score, there's very little chance that you can actually get a mortgage. It's super hard. And that's why I was saying, unfortunately, you might get declined. So this is, again, if at some point you want to buy a house or you're already thinking about buying a house, why really having that good to great score is super important. And so here are some of the tactics that I was mentioning about trying to actually get that credit score up. So keep your credit utilization ratio under 30%, right? Some of the best scores are under 10%. Here's a trick, and it works every time. Once you've what's called, for some reason in this industry, everything's sort of like 12 months. If you've shown for 12 months you've done something, your lender is open to talking to you again. But you could cheat your debt to income ratio by just calling up your lender and sort of saying, hey, will you extend my credit line? So let's say you currently have a credit line for $1,500. You say, can I get one for $3,000? And they say, yeah, sure, we'll give you another $1,500. And then you just don't use it. Don't use it. That's the trick. Don't use it. And then automatically your credit utilization ratio has gone down because you now have a higher line. So this is definitely one of the tricks that people do. Just ask for an increase after 12 months. Don't be applying for credit. Limit those applications to 1 to 2 every 6 months. If you have let's say you did get tempted and you opened up a credit card at a clothing store or furniture store or something like that, and you're like, hey, I'm never going to use this again, at least keep it open for 2 years. You actually get points taken away if you close cards less than 2 years. And then here's another trick. If you happen to want to close a card because it had a fee attached to it, so I'll just be honest with you, a lot of times, I might be buying something and they'll be like, hey, if you open up this credit card, we'll give you $250. And you're like, okay, that sounds good. So I opened up a credit card where I got some rewards or some miles or all that kind of stuff. And then I used that for a year, and then they were going to charge me for the card. And I'm like, I don't want to pay a fee for this card. So I called them and said, what can I do? And it just so happens, I think this was with Chase or Capital One, one of the bigger credit card things. What they actually did was they moved the credit line from that one card that I wanted to close to another card that I already had. So even though I closed the card, again, they're super amenable. They moved the line to another card, so it didn't affect my credit score at all. So another trick where you can call and sort of say, hey, if you happen to have multiple cards from the same provider. Here was the trick I was mentioning to you before about paying your bill more than once a month. If you have revolving debt, they see that as a real indication that you're trying to pay your debt off. So especially if you're at that minimum payment that I was mentioning, which sometimes is $25 or $35, trying to do that twice a month, just sending in an extra payment, they really see that as a good indication. And then of course, just, being patient, because as I said, just sort of time in the saddle, over time, your credit score starts looking better. So let's go on to some other debt consolidation. So from this workshop, I know I've been talking a lot, but here's the sort of to-do, which is what I would do after this class, or if you listen to this again, maybe start at this point, but go and do the inventory. Go get your credit card statements, go get your loan statements. If you have an auto loan, whatever you might have, go get everything. There's this amazing fun survey that less than 10% of people can tell you what interest rate they're paying on anything. So we all walk around the earth and somebody says, hey, you have a credit card? And you're like, yeah. It's like, what's your interest rate? And people go, I don't know. Nobody knows their interest rates. So this is a good exercise so that you know exactly what you're paying. So get those statements, figure out what your credit line, what your credit available is, and then what your interest rates are so that you can do the debt to income ratio. And then you can look and say, okay, so are these interest rates too high compared to what I think is available out in the market? And it's super easy to figure out what's out in the market. You can go to bankrate.com, you can go to any of those, Credit Karma, Lending Tree, any of those things, and you can sort of see what the going rate is for things and go, oh, wow, my rates I'm paying way more than I should. And then you can think about debt consolidation or some refinance options. Another thing that you can do, and I did this a lot actually, so I put myself through undergrad and through business school 100% by myself. Unfortunately, I'm the first person in my family to go to college and to graduate from college. And so I actually had to use a lot of credit cards. And so one of the tricks that I utilized even for myself was I was moving balances a lot. You could move balances from one card to get on a lower rate card. Maybe it was also the times when I was in school, but there were a lot of lenders who would be like, hey, you could get this credit card for a year or 6 months with 1% or 0%. And so the only thing there that you have to look out for is, are there any prepayment penalties or any transfer fees? Like sometimes now I notice that if you want to move your balance from one credit card to another credit card, they might charge you like 3%. And then you have to do the math and sort of say, okay, does that even make sense for that? But moving balances around is definitely a strategy. As I mentioned previously, refinancing high interest auto loans and or home loans to lower rates after you've paid against them for 12 months, you're eligible for that. Thinking about looking at your debt and making that plan where you're going to pay off your highest interest credit cards first and trying to pay them all off and then do the minimums on the lower ones, but getting the highest interest credit cards out first. And then, and this is another strategy that really works. And when I worked at Lending Club, this essentially is how Lending Club built their business. But you consolidate all of your credit card debt and or student loan debt with one personal loan that you then hopefully get an interest rate that is less than the sum of the individual interest rates. And the credit bureaus see that immediately as a good thing because you've moved from revolving credit to what's called a loan with a payment plan. And so you get points for that. So you can, I want to say, it's not going to ultimately help you pay the whole thing off, but moving things around can help you as you're sort of triaging things. Sometimes, and I know this is always sort of easier said than done, but maybe you could do some short-term borrowing for friends or family. I know I did that at one point. Just had a credit card issue that was a really high card. I just wanted to pay it off. I actually borrowed $2,500 from my uncle, and then I paid it off. And it was one of those things. It was nice. Not everybody can do that. It's also good if you're going to consolidate a bunch of different loans or think about it to go to one of these consolidation tools. NerdWallet has a good one where you can put in, this is why it's important to do that inventory, go put in all of your credit card balances and then the interest rates, and then it'll tell you maybe which ones you could consolidate or not, because you want to do sort of the weighted average. You want to make sure that the consolidation works for you. And then these are way downstream, but just so that you have this knowledge in your head. But if and when then you own a house, or who knows, you guys are so smart, maybe somebody already owns a house here, or you can also do home equity loans, which have lower interest rates against your home. Once you start investing, if you have a brokerage account at a Fidelity, Charles Schwab, Robinhood, whoever you might have, you can also borrow against your assets. Margin loans usually have lower interest rates. And then ultimately, when you start working, there is also the ability to take out loans against your 401k. And there's now, there's actually a 401k loan to be able to pay off student loans up to $10,000. So they keep making it sort of easier for people to pay off their debt. So just wrapping up, here's sort of my 3 action steps for you. I would, again, go do that inventory. So gather all your current loan, your credit statements, everything, just sort of figure out where you stand, knowing it's a little bit like getting on the scale. Some people don't want to do it. I know I look at the scale every Wednesday and I make myself get on the scale on Wednesdays. I'm like, it's Wednesday, just do it. But same sort of thing, just figure out where you are, and then go over the math, figure out your debt to income ratio and your credit utilization ratio, because this is going to then help you think about your plan. Use those online calculators to determine if debt consolidation makes sense for you. And then again, I really encourage you to take action, call your credit card company, try to align your payment with your cash flow, ask for a larger credit line to augment your credit utilization ratio. but you have to make a plan. I think that's the one thing, is just then sort of sitting down, and once you've done this, what's your plan? How are you going to attack paying off your credit card debt? So I hope that covered the 3 sections, and I would be very happy to answer any questions.
Yeah, thank you so much for the great presentation, Eileen. Before I read the chat aloud, does anyone want to unmute and ask a question out loud?
Actually, I have a question, Eileen. You mentioned the 3 different credit card financial bureaus, and actually was researching this myself earlier this year. I was curious how maybe the ratings may differ from one, and does having a high credit score on one of them immediately kind of allow you to qualify for a high credit score on another one, or is it completely different?
Yeah, so Brandon, that's actually a really good question. Thanks for asking that. They all, in the, I think I sort of showed in the anatomy of the credit card. Let me go back to that. Here we go. In the anatomy of the card, meaning the payment history, the current loan to credit balance, all of this, I think how it differs is that maybe each credit bureau has their percentages just slightly different from each other, which is why your credit score then sort of gets tabulated differently at each one of those bureaus. However, and this is why I'm really glad you asked this question, I have known people who are actually looking for mortgages, and that, I'm making this up, Experian may have put them in fair, but TransUnion puts them in good, and they will actually then go to a lender and they will say, no, let's please use the TransUnion credit report and not the Experian one, or vice versa. So it is possible to go to a lender, and this is why advocating for yourself, right, and knowing what your credit scores are at the 3 bureaus, and if one's better than the other, calling it to the lender's attention and actually saying, no, my credit score is better at TransUnion or Experian than it is at Equifax or whatever, and going in with that knowledge and being empowered by that, it is completely possible to have to break bans across the credit unions or credit bureaus.
Okay, thank you. That's super interesting.
Yeah.
Looks like we do have a couple questions in the chat.
Uh-huh.
First question is, what's the purpose of Equifax, TransUnion, and Experian having different measures of credit score?
Yeah, so I almost think that this is just one of those things where it's a little bit like competition, right? At some point, it's companies decided that why should Equifax own credit reports, and so TransUnion did that. I'm not exactly sure of the history of who was first, but I just think it's a competitive. It's just natural competition, so that there isn't one credit bureau that everybody uses and one sort of, I'll call it, single source of truth. I think this is just a capitalism at its best, that there's sort of 3 different agencies out there. And I don't think that anyone, or at least in all of the lending businesses that I've been in my life, nobody sort of goes, oh, this one's better than the other or whatever. I just think people use them in a very sort of fluid manner.
Got it. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And then another question, is there a correct way to recover after a missed payment, for example?
Yeah, so unfortunately, if you have a missed payment, it is going to go on your credit report, but it will fall, quote unquote, off of your credit report over time. So I think if you miss a payment, it may not affect your credit score. And then I want to say, I could find the exact answer to this, but I want to say it's between 24 and 36 months. It'll actually fall off of your credit report that you missed a payment. And so it's not going to haunt you forever, as opposed to getting sent to collections. That stays on your credit report for a lot longer than missing a payment. So that's why I was making that big deal about not going to collections.
Okay, thank you. And then another question, does the current loan or credit card debt include secure loans like an auto loan?
Yeah, so your overall debt to income ratio, your debt to income ratio definitely includes the auto loans. Okay, so that one formula. However, the credit utilization ratio only applies to credit cards. And I appreciate being asked that question because I probably glossed over that. So your debt to income ratio is every single thing, every loan you have. And then just the credit utilization is just specific to credit cards. Thank you. Really good question.
Does anyone have any other questions?
Awesome. Well, my emails in the pamphlet, I think under speakers, and if anybody did have a question that they wanted to just shoot me an email, I would be happy to answer it. And again, thank you so much for inviting me. It was a real pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you, Eileen. I will now pass it off to Sebastian to talk about our exit survey for this workshop.
Thank you, Eileen. I believe we all really learned a lot in this presentation. My name is Sebastian Diaz. I'm a junior internet economics major, and I'm an internal operations member in Flejcon. Here's the link to our exit survey for this workshop. Please fill it out so that we can receive your feedback for our team and for our speaker, Eileen. Once you've done that, feel free to stick around for our next workshop, which will be on I-10 starting at 12:30 p.m. Thank you.